Delanco Township Committee meeting of September 18th, 2023, beginning at 7 p.m. at the Delanco Township Municipal Building, 770 Coopertown Road, Delanco, New Jersey.
Something? Okay.
We are recording.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yep, we are recording.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the September 18th, 2023 Township Committee meeting. Can I have a roll call, please, Janice?
Mr. Bartlett.
Here.
Mr. Elect.
Here.
Ms. Seuss.
Here.
Mr. Templeton.
Here.
Ms. Fitzpatrick.
Here. Also present, Mr. Schwab, our Township Administrator, Mrs. Lohr, our Municipal Clerk, Mrs. Russell, our Deputy Municipal Clerk, Mr. Tilger, our Police Chief, and Mr. Scott Taylor, our Township Planner. Please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Janice, would you please read the sunshine statement?
Please be advised that proper notice of this meeting has been given in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act in the following manner. Written notice has been mailed to the Burlington County Times and mailed to the Burlington County Times and Courier Post and published in the January 4th, 2023 editions, and written notice has been posted on the official bulletin board of the Township of Delanco at least 48 hours prior to the meeting.
Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
Okay, our first item on the agenda is a presentation and discussion regarding cannabis, land use, and regulatory issues. So we have our planner with us tonight, Mr. Scott Taylor, who worked with our subcommittee going over the different issues and what could possibly work in Delanco. So Scott, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you, and it's good to see you. It's been a while since I've been in this room.
Yes.
And I don't know if either of the committee people who were on the subcommittee want to make any opening comments, or I can just get into my presentation.
No, I think they kind of made some comments at a meeting about a month or so ago, and we were pleased with their results, and I thought you gave a nice report, so you can just move forward.
Thanks. So we did. We had a meeting back in May, and I know that the subcommittee had met prior to that to discuss a number of issues relative to cannabis. And as the committee knows, and for the public, in 2021, the state legalized the adult use for recreational use of marijuana, or cannabis as it's now called. The state set up a significant land use component that gives the towns in the state a lot of flexibility on how they treat cannabis in their municipalities. There were 6 classes of cannabis license types that were set up. Class 1 is a cultivator or grower. Class 2 is manufacturing, that takes the cannabis and produces gummies, tinctures, a variety of other products. Class 3 is wholesalers, that are just that. They store that in buildings, which is not entirely dissimilar to the distributor, which is Class 4. Class 5 is a retail or dispensary use, and Class 6 is a delivery service use. The towns don't have any flexibility in dealing with a Class 6 delivery service. They have to allow a delivery service to operate and deliver within any municipality. The subcommittee initially, from a planning standpoint and a land use standpoint, there are a host of issues associated with cultivating, from energy consumption to significant odor, as well as dealing with wastewater issues. So at this time, the cannabis subcommittee determined not to move forward with any recommendations relative to growing or cultivation. Similarly, Class 5, which is a retailer or a dispensary license, There are also a number of issues associated with that. So the subcommittee recommended that Class 1 and Class 5, the dispensary, not be moved forward at this time. So the focus of our discussion tonight will relate to Classes 2, 3, and 4, and those are the manufacturers, wholesaling, and distributing. As we go through and we identify in our June 12, 2023 report, some of the definitions for clarification of manufacturer, wholesaler, and distributor. One of the things that was very unique about the way the law was set up was it gave the municipality flexibility with regard to how many of each type of cannabis facility can be located within the town, which is really unusual from a land use perspective, because if you typically zone something for a retail use or a restaurant use, you can't say we only want one hamburger restaurant, which is why we have so many, well, I won't use any specific names, we have so many McDonald's directly across the street from those other fast food restaurants. But the state allowed towns, realizing that there were a lot of concerns and because of the newness of this, to A, either opt out, or B, limit the number of those types. So as we went through the process, the subcommittee had initially recommended that from a manufacturing standpoint, it may make sense to limit that to only one manufacturer at this time. There was no recommendation for a limitation for a wholesaler or distributor. This is something we've worked with a few different towns on. And again, because of the newness when the law first passed, and we had done research from all over the country, it is something that folks are struggling with, both sort of personally, how do we deal with this? How do we protect the members of our community as much as possible? The one thing that we looked at from a planning standpoint, we know that we have manufacturing here in Delanco, we know that we have wholesale uses, and we know that we have distribution uses. When we had the discussion, we were trying to find out what is the distinction about cannabis. And one of the discussions we had is, depending on where you come from on this issue, we have manufacturers, wholesalers, or distributors in town now that could be manufacturing vodka or wholesaling vodka or distributing vodka. We also have those same uses that could have Oxycontin or other opioids in those buildings. And for the most part, cannabis is sort of somewhere in the middle. So the question was, if we have stacks of palletized material inside of a building, how should we treat cannabis? And how is it different than another alcohol, a distilled spirit, or even tobacco, or other prescription drugs or opioids? So the main issues that we talked about were coming up with some conditional use standards to address a few of those concerns. The main recommendation was wherever wholesalers or distributors are permitted, to be able to permit those buildings to also wholesale or warehouse or distribute cannabis from those facilities. We know that there have been some changes recently creating the I-3 district and some rezoning there. So these recommendations would flow through, that if the warehouse is permitted there now, whichever zone that is, I-1 or I-2, it would, under these certain conditions that are shown on page 2 of the report, be able to operate. And I'll skip down. At the top of page 2, there is a land use component that will go into our land development regulations, which is really what I'm going to focus on this evening. And I should probably only be about an hour and a half with this presentation. Sorry. I warned the subcommittee I would do that. There is also licensing and taxation ordinances and things that, as part of that licensing process through the municipality, and also some of the odor control and filtration, which should be handled through land use and also as part of the police power of the municipality, that can be coordinated if these move forward with Mr. Heinold, with the Township Committee, and with Chief. But focusing on those conditional use standards, one of the things that we looked at for all of those uses is obviously they must obtain and retain in good standing all of their applicable state licenses. Adequate security shall be demonstrated and provided, including 24-hour emergency access contact information, along with video monitoring. That really is not that much of an issue on several of these that we dealt with. As much as towns and boards are concerned with inside security of the inventory, the owner of the building is the only person who's more concerned with the security of the inventory inside the building. Everything has to be done within a fully enclosed building, including all of the loading and unloading operations. Also, the fourth condition is that any trash or refuse that has any cannabis-related material in it shall be in a locked enclosure or stored within the building itself and removed by a private hauler. For Class 3 and Class 4, the wholesaler and distributors, the products must be fully manufactured and no process, refining, or modification to its form is permitted on site. The only thing that would be permitted would be the repackaging without any processing of cannabis materials. Nuisance odors, which can be a concern, we have a lengthy discussion there to require odor-absorbing ventilation systems with any of those uses, so it cannot be identified from anywhere outside of the building. And we have some very specific language that we've developed from several different ordinances that we've included in our recommendation here. This other one is just me putting one in that says all pickup and delivery should occur between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. because frankly that should really occur for almost any use, just to minimize backup beepers and noise within our community. We also had some recommendations regarding energy conservation, which is not a pure requirement, but more of a suggestion for those things to be considered from an environmental sustainability standpoint. So that would apply to all three of the uses that we talked about, Class 2, 3, and 4, manufacturing, warehouse, and distribution. We have an additional condition that we're recommending for the manufacturing, and that would be that any site containing a cannabis manufacturer be located no closer than 250 feet from a residential use or a residential zoning district, which would, for the most part, limit that to locations somewhere along Creek or Coopertown Road. And then for a cannabis distributor, cannabis distributors under the law are permitted to house and distribute live plants. So we're suggesting a limitation on that for it to be a period of not more than 72 hours. After that period, there become potential need for light and watering and other cultural requirements that start to get close to cultivation. And then there can also be some increased odors associated with that. So we wanted to put a limitation on that. So that's the general overview. And much like any conditional use within our ordinance, if it is listed as a conditionally permitted use, anyone wanting to move in has to be issued what's called a conditional use permit. And they have to comply with every single one of these requirements, or they don't get to build in town. Now, Doug had mentioned to me, normally if a business moves in and they comply with 5 out of 6 of those conditions, then they just need a D variance from the Joint Land Use Board for what's known as a conditional use variance. Doug is suggesting, and he's aware of other communities that have done it, that do not allow any D variances to be considered. So you either comply with every single one of these conditions, or you are not permitted to construct that class of facility within the township. There is also, as part of the licensing process at the state level, a local licensing process. And there are forms and other things that need to be done as part of that, because the state wants to make sure before they issue licenses for any of these classes of uses that the host community is also comfortable with these. So there were several things sort of factored into the legislation to be able to back that up. That was the short version.
An hour
Right.
20 to go.
Yeah. Have you had experience with other communities, local communities that initially opted out and have now opted in under certain conditions like we're thinking of doing?
There are a lot of communities all over that opted out initially
Right.
and then have dipped their toes back into the water. Some communities have allowed multiple different classes. Others have sort of focused on one. One of our towns in Ocean County has allowed one dispensary. There is a concern that a lot of communities have that they don't want to create a concentration of dispensaries. A concentration of cultivation is not realistic just based on sort of how that market works.
Right.
But the dispensary, which really has been sort of the most concerning of the classes to most towns, the towns are limiting those. But again, much in the same way that if we had a warehouse that was storing alcohol or something else, we wouldn't limit that necessarily because it's a pallet, it's an enclosed building. So are we particularly concerned if another material that is now legal in our state is stored in that building?
I think there was one other item, one class that we inadvertently left off the list. We did talk about it at the subcommittee meetings. It's not a class number, but it's the testing laboratories,
Right.
which is another item which, when we discussed it at the subcommittee meetings, there really wasn't any concern with that. And when you think of a testing laboratory where people are testing cannabis, they're not sitting there, testing the actual product personally. They're using, laboratory equipment. They're doing sampling. I think there's a certain percentage of each batch that has to be sent to them to test and whatnot. And it doesn't seem like these facilities are big at all. Small facility, so we didn't really see a concern with that. We meeting the subcommittee.
Right. If we decide and agree to do this, how long does it take to get all this on the books in order for I guess what we would do is then contact the state? Would they approve our?
No.
No?
And I don't know if you want to comment, but the state doesn't need to. These are local land use decisions. So much like any other ordinance, we would meet and refine those recommendations and then work with Mr. Heinold to create ordinance amendments for those industrial zones. And then it goes through the same process of an introduction, a referral to the Joint Land Use Board for master plan consistency, and then second reading and adoption. So it's really that same
Same
issue.
process, okay.
So that's for the land use part. As I did mention at the top of page 2, there are taxation and other sort of municipal licensing ordinances that would also have to be put in place.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Scott or anything to add?
Just a note, I think that conditional use, even without the variance thing, still has to go to the Joint Land Use Board. It's not
Correct.
issued by the zoning officer. It's the Joint Land Use Board that will say, yes, you meet all the conditions if that's our requirement.
Correct, and we did that intentionally. Instead of listing it as a permitted use
Right.
in those zones, which means they could go in under a transfer permit by the zoning officer, we specifically suggested making them conditional uses, which under the municipal land use law, the authority to grant those is only given to the planning board, or a joint land use board in this case.
That makes sense.
Now, these recommendations that we have under the conditional uses and the additional, like the filtration systems, that's on top of the already pretty stringent state guidelines that are in place to make sure the exhaust system is adequate to prevent this. So this is on top of that. This
So
is that
the-
extra layer.
It is. It's really belt and suspenders because the state sometimes with their enforcement arms may not be staffed the way that if there's an issue, this gives us the ability to enforce these at the local level.
Right. Because that was kind of our concern, like who is policing the air from the state level? Do we have to call them every time there's a concern? That's why we kind of implemented this.
Right.
Adam, I know one of your officers was asked to be on the committee at one time. Did he give you any feedback on
He came
it?
back with the feedback that each time they met, and, you know, he did state how they worked diligently and they were thorough, and he was satisfied with the end results of what we're hearing tonight. I guess I do have one question when you're talking about the enforcement, especially, with the additional condition under class 4, like who monitors the 72 hours?
So much like almost any land use, including someone building a swing set or a shed too close to their property line, for the most part, the municipality it would be almost impossible to actively enforce something like that until there's a problem. If there is odor coming from the building and the town then initiates and says, you've been storing live plants, show us your receipts, you've been storing these for longer than permitted, then the town has the ability to initiate an action. But like everything, if there is no odor and everything is quiet and there are no issues, it really is difficult to police otherwise.
We didn't talk about the taxation part, bless you. We didn't talk about the taxation part and the benefits to the town, and that you have to do.
Bless you.
Bless you.
You're all done there, Beth? The taxation that the municipality can set, we're free to set our own tax rate, but in no case can the rate exceed, for cultivation or manufacturing, 2% of the receipts for it. So figure if you have a warehouse with a lot of cannabis in there, that's a decent amount of taxation money coming into the municipality, and 2% for retailers, we're not doing that. That's not what's proposed, and 1% for wholesalers.
Anyone else have any questions?
Do you have anything else, Chief?
That was the thing that really stood out for me, was the monitoring of that additional condition.
When we discussed this, whatever it was, a year or two ago, one of the things that came up or that was brought to our attention from some businesses up the street was the proximity of potential cannabis storage, processing, whatever, in proximity to food processing, handling, storage. And that seemed to light up the phone in that regards. Is that something that you've had any experience with, or as far as now you got another buffer or an area that's you're kind of the business that you've got there that may be handling or storing food product doesn't want or is discouraged from coming to your town or being in your town now that this is next door?
So in all of the research we've done on this, and I've probably read over 100 ordinances, I don't recall ever seeing anything about a proximity to a food processing facility. If anybody has something cited, we'd be happy to. My sort of outside look at this would be, if the odor is controlled, odor is really airborne particles that can be perceived, obviously, through your olfactory senses. If that is at such a level that it's not perceived and dangerous outside the building, and manufacturing is really the only one that poses that of the three that we're considering here, if that is fully filtered, then I can't see how that would create an issue with food processing. By a similar token, in that same building, someone could build fishing boats using fiberglass, which is, again, a very odoriferous material. I don't think I've ever said that word before.
Did you just make that up?
No, I'm pretty sure it's a real word. I think my wife's used it towards me. But,
It's not nice to talk about your socks that way.
if there, exactly. If there is, and I can specifically do, a quick Google research on that, or if anybody else has any instances of concerns or issues, then perhaps we can factor that into the filtration if there is a concern.
Yeah, I just seem to recall we did get some calls from our, it was Powerless or Misfits regarding that potential. The other thing on the, was it page 3 on the class 2, any site, located no closer than 250 feet from a residential use, residential zoning district. Site, is that the building or is that the parcel that the activity is on?
Very specifically, we wrote site, so it would be the property boundary and not the building itself.
Okay, so that would preclude anything up here, up the street?
Correct. And that was done intentionally to sort of leave it in that core industrial, those sort of core industrial corridors.
Along Creek Road?
Long Creek.
And not Coopertown?
Probably not.
Yeah, because it says Coopertown.
But potentially it could. We didn't do a lot by lot analysis. Normally when you do these conditional use standards, to avoid a spot zoning issue, you don't say, well, it could go here and it could go here, but it couldn't go here. We try to look globally at corridors, and we try to set that parameter up of 250 feet. And if at some point in the future, a residential parcel converts to a commercial parcel, there could be another property that would then qualify for that conditional use standard.
And that 250 feet is not just for the boundaries of Delanco. We would be concerned about our neighbors.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking at Perkins Lane and the residents over there.
Right.
That's all residential on the other side of the fence there.
Absolutely. And well aware with that, and we went to great lengths when AE Price came in the early 2000s to try to, at the original Joint Land Use Board hearing, the loading doors were supposed to face the residential properties, and the Joint Land Use Board had that sort of flip to internalize, specifically to try to protect those folks.
They have, I think they actually have dispensaries in Edgewater Park already. I think they have, but they're out on 130. I think there's at least 1 or 2.
They do.
Curaleaf.
Yeah, then there's 2 that are being built right now in Delran.
Yeah.
Retail.
Right, almost right across the street from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I question the ability to monitor and continue to monitor this, some of the things you talked about, and the odors, things like that. I mean, DEP really has no enforcement capability. Right. DEP is a hollow shell. And so to push that on the local municipality, we have enough trouble enforcing what we have in black and white. And we have enough issues and experience with, quote, normal businesses complying with planning board ordinances and resolutions and what they're allowed to do and not do on their properties. And that's a continuing issue with some unfortunately, some businesses in town. And this adds a whole new layer of complexity to the matter, along with this whole industry, if you want to call it that, is evolving, and there seems to be a gold rush to that, a lot of big money nationally in different areas you hear about, and so there's probably going to be some consolidation and some shrinking of all the range of potential licensees. The other matter is that if you do permit one, because of the nature of the licensing process that the state has, that potentially there's a whole new area of potential litigation if there's an issue that the township has with someone not in compliance based on who they're encouraging to get licenses and permits for this business. And I just see that being a potential difficulty.
It is, but I don't see that it's any different than any other land use, that if they're not operating properly, we have both a licensing component that can have a municipal enforcement through the police power, but then also that second level, which is something we talked about with the subcommittee, of having a land use enforcement. And that is what the legal system and the judges are for, that if somebody's operating outside of what they're permitted to do. In terms of the monitoring, the only thing I could say is it's not unlike noise. If there is somebody operating outside of the permitted decibel ranges, there needs to be an enforcement action that sometimes... Right.
No one does that. We're bombarded, and no one has any ability to do anything or wants to do anything.
The one thing I would...
I don't know what you refer to when you mean nobody has any. Do you have something in mind that's already happening in Delanco that we're not enforcing? So, I mean, this is like a specialty. I can't imagine just any company is going to come in here and present something to the Joint Land Use Board, a package to do this, who isn't very much involved financially as well as educational. They have to know what they're doing, because I don't think just any Tom, Dick, or Harry business is going to come in and do this. I'm sure if you check with some of the other communities that have been actually put these on the books and have some different people moving in, I would like to see how their reaction is and how it's, I haven't heard any complaints from any municipalities, and I know you researched different municipalities who've already had it or were working on it, and I haven't seen anything that it's an issue.
We actually had I think you were here that night, Scott.
Yeah.
We had the councilman from the borough of Brooklawn came to the meeting, and you were there, right, Scott?
I was not there for that one. I was there at the second meeting.
Thank you. But they actually just entered, they did their ordinances and whatnot, and they're actually having, I think it might be open by now, their first retailer right on Route 130. And they looked through everything as well, and they had the same concerns, that they found that the positives being the taxation outweighed the negatives.
A majority of the issues that we saw as we were going through and doing this research, the majority of them related to the cultivation, which does generate a tremendous amount of light. If it's not within a fully enclosed building, it literally creates a glow because of what they have to do to really successfully generate this, the wastewater and the smell. So the cultivation really seems to be the largest, which is one of the reasons that the subcommittee really opted. It's highly unlikely we would get a cultivator here in Delanco. And because of those potential concerns associated with that, that would be, that was immediately rejected at this time. So the only thing I would say is perhaps if there's a concern about the ability for the odor to be enforced, perhaps as part of the licensing, there can be language in there if we do get one of those users and there is an increased level of revenue that's generated for the municipality, that can create an ability to have some increased enforcement as necessary. And potentially, I'd want to talk to Mr. Heinel, but potentially even fines that could be levied back to cover the enforcement costs to that class 2, 3, or 4 user.
Okay, I don't have any questions. I think it's, I think the subcommittee did a great job. It was like a 2-year process, practically, and Scott, I think your report's very thorough, and I appreciate your time putting this together. I think it's,
I have two concerns. If the operation, on their operating hours, I think were from 7 to 10, and even if they vacate the building or whatever at 11 o'clock, and we're relying on cameras to provide recordings or what's going on in the facility, I think it puts our community in the position of having to have additional police officers on staff to cover this, especially if we end up with 2 or 3 or more facilities that are doing work with cannabis. So that falls back on us, the community, as far as taxpayers, of having a larger police force. And the other thing that, whether I'm crazy, but because the person or the company that's going to invest in bring their facility someplace, they're going to want to protect it. And I can see, or I envision, barbed wire fences going up around these facilities. You know, we have 3 warehouses right down the street here, 2 behind us and 1 down the road. You know, and they're going to want to secure their product, and I could envision them, because of security, and it's probably going to be, or it is a high demand product, and folks are going to want to get in there. Crooks are crooks, and they're going to find a way in. But I think that visually we may end up with something we don't want.
Well, to your first point, I'm 95% sure that our ordinance prohibits the use of any barbed wire in the community.
right.
Building security itself would really be the primary. This suggests monitoring and video recording, and not that it would be monitored 24/7 by the police. That responsibility would lie with the security companies. All the ones that we've reviewed and dealt with have their own private security and their own monitoring that handle that. So whether or not there would, I mean, that's a policy issue if you believe there's need for additional police, but I think it would be more of a reactive response. Similarly, that if we have a warehouse today that is storing vodka or OxyContin, the police are not monitoring to make sure that somebody's not stealing those. I did have the opportunity to work on the CVS facility in Lumberton years ago, and they store, when I worked at it, and it's been enlarged since, it was 17 acres under one roof, and that's where they store their pharmaceuticals and their prescription drugs. And the amount of security of that site is all done with double doors inside and a serious bank of security monitors on the wall, how they handle that. And there's no barbed wire, no gates. They deal all that as building perimeter security. I found that out because I went to count parking lot lights and street trees, and within about 45 seconds, I had a security guard saying, "Can we help you?" I said, "I'm here to count trees and put more lights in."
We heard that last week.
What's that?
We heard that excuse last week. Everybody comes out to count the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think they, and the ones we've been at several hearings for dispensaries. They more than anybody have that vested interest and securing their building with locks and doors and double doors has been their main priority, because again, they have investors and a lot of these folks are well-heeled. And back to your point, that's one of the reasons we want to hit this. We know the state has their own part. We know that we're going to have our own licensing part, but also having the land use part allows the municipality, not just this year or 3 years, but 23 years from now, because a lot of businesses come in and they're very well intentioned, but then they retire and they sell the building to somebody else. So we want to make sure that every possible scenario in belt and suspenders was dealt with here. We read case studies from Colorado and a lot of other places to make sure that this can be as tight as it can.
Good. Anyone else have any questions for Scott?
Mayor, if
Yeah.
I may, I have
Sure.
2 questions or points. Scott, the first one is, for existing approved warehouse distribution facilities, how does that juxtapose with the, like a cannabis distributor? These facilities are already approved for warehouse distribution. They want to bring these product in as a client, and a lot of our warehouse facilities have different clients moving goods in and out. So how does this differ? Like, we don't like the one up on Burlington Avenue used to do the washer and dryers and refrigerators, the Whirlpool, the Sears. You know, they didn't need specific approvals for that product. Same way with any warehousing. You're going to have different products as you have clients and contracts to store and distribute. How does this, so let's say one of our existing facilities wants to get and have some of its space dedicated for cannabis storing and distribution. Normally, something like that, a product would not have to come back for specific approval, but this would.
So that's why we very specifically made it a conditional use standard. So it automatically has to get a license from the governing body.
Okay.
And secondarily, because it's a conditional use, that approval can only be granted by the Joint Land Use Board.
Okay. So even though these facilities already have their approvals as warehouse distribution,
They were storing vodka in their entire building.
we'd never know it.
And they wanted one little corner to store one pallet of cannabis. They have to come to the Joint Land Use Board.
For additional approvals.
And comply with all of these standards.
Unlike other products that they're moving in and out.
Exactly.
Okay, just wanted to make that clear that that's something very different.
And that's why we didn't just make it a permitted use in those zones, we made it a conditional use to give that extra level.
So even though these warehouses already have approvals, if they want to do cannabis,
Yep.
they've got to come back to the township.
Yes.
Okay, great. The second one is with the odor. Having lived near a cocoa manufacturing plant, which you think would have a nice chocolatey smell, it actually stunk terrible. So when we have a complaint for a noise under the noise ordinance or lighting, too bright light or something, it's based on the lighting lumens, foot candles that are allowed. And for noise, it's decibels. And we don't have a decibel meter, so it's very hard to enforce. So how do we measure smell? What's the breaking point? Again, you know, years ago, driving back and forth to college and all, I was coming past the Melita coffee. You smelled that on 295. Well, that was not an offensive smell, actually, maybe to some people. So how do we enforce? We just can't say, "Oh, that stinks." Is there some level of parts per million, or I don't know.
So the short answer is no. You go out and you say, "Ooh, that stinks." And this is something that we dealt with Doug on, and there is a significant amount of case law and issues out there that, unlike foot candles, unlike decibels, trying to measure, I think you would need a gas chromatograph to measure this, which doesn't happen.
So how do we enforce smell?
So smell is, and we wrote some language in here, this had been reviewed with Doug. These are legally enforceable, that, like Melita, if it is detectable by a person of reasonable sensitivity at the boundary of the site, you are no longer in compliance with this requirement.
At the property line?
Yes.
Not Well, how about if it's wafting through the town? The
So
smell?
as long, if it leaves the site.
If it
and
leaves
is
the site.
Detectable off-site.
Okay,
And that's where we have under, at the end of the first sentence of item number 6 at the bottom of page 2.
okay.
That prevents cannabis nuisance odors from being detected off-site.
It's tough to narrow it down. I smell it every day going by my house. I mean, who do you blame it on? The building or the dog walker?
Well, when the dog walker leaves, if you can still smell it.
It might be the dog.
Right.
So technically, the code enforcement officer would have to go and stand somewhere at the property line.
Off-site, wherever it's
Off-site.
detected.
And just make a log that smelled it, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And, so that's the enforcement
Yes,
versus a decibel meter or foot candles or something like that.
correct.
Okay? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anyone else? No?
I'm done.
Yeah, process-wise, do you wait for someone business to express interest and then adopt it? Or do you adopt it as you're looking at it and then maybe someone from the outside says, yeah, I can fit those parameters? Because by the time that would happen, maybe things have changed, then you gotta go change, they'll come in and say, well, it's fine, but I think that's silly and that's silly. You know, I mean, we do that with the redevelopment stuff where you actually negotiate with the business, but that's not what you do here. So if you set this up and everybody says, well, nobody can meet this, so it's kind of worthless, as opposed to the person who says, you know, I'm interested in putting a manufacturing place here if you make those changes. I mean, how does that whole thing work when you're dealing with, because early on we had calls from various businesses, we haven't last year or so. So do we adopt this and then advertise because we want them to come, because we get the income from it? Or we have it here as a defensive mechanism, if they show up, we got some way to do it. Are we trying to encourage it, or is this just in case?
I feel like they won't even look at our town if we don't have anything on the books. They'll just go to another town that already.
So we're looking to encourage that. We
Right.
want somebody
Yeah, I
to do this
think so.
because we can get some revenue from it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of been our experience from knowing people in the industry and how they're dealing.
And that's work
It really
that-
needs to be in place before they're leaving.
So they've adopted it and people have then come. Do we actually have the towns that have adopted things? And Kate was asking that question, anywhere in the state that have adopted in the last year?
Yeah, Chemung has some, Hainesport, Ocean, Evesham. There are numerous. And these ordinances are really an amalgamation of stuff from all over the country and other ordinances.
With the manufacturing, the distribution, the warehousing, not the two at the end that are the more controversial.
Delran and
The one
Riverside,
above.
obviously, they have,
They have the retail.
yeah.
Retail.
Does anyone else have the manufacturer, distribution, and warehousing?
Belmar does. They have manufacturing. I believe it's Belmar. I
They have
believe Winslow, Berlin. There's another one, I want to say that it's up by Clinton Township. It may be Reddington or one of those other municipalities. That was actually one that I think was a converted Walmart. And there were a lot of issues with that,
Smell.
with the odor, with that facility.
But I mean, if they had these rules in place, then an applicant wouldn't even start it unless they could comply.
Right.
It's not something that later on you have some debate in front of the Joint Land Use Board because we're not allowing variances, where they could say, okay, we'll allow that under the variance.
Right.
So this is a whole different thing where, hey, these are the rules, no variances, don't even come in asking for a variance, it's just, you gotta prove to the Joint Land Use Board that you meet all these things, and that's it.
I don't think that any of these are really that far-fetched.
I'm not suggesting they are, I just,
Yeah.
business people, like,
No, I feel like the state's regulations are the biggest hurdle, and then these are just kind of on top of that. So they have to clear those first. And ours are just kind of that extra layer of protection, so.
And again, that was done intentionally for us to not rely completely on state enforcement, but for us to have that additional level to be able to handle that enforcement locally.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah, and also, I receive, occasionally, actually quite regularly Oprah requests from companies that are looking to see if we have any ordinances, have put any ordinances on the books to allow any of the classes, particularly looking for retail.
Yeah.
But, so there are companies out there that are checking back with municipalities that have opted out to see if they've put anything on the books. And I get those Oprah requests every once in a while.
The problem right now in the state is supply and demand. There's not enough cultivators for the supply. I mean, you're going to have a ton of retailers that can only open 2 days a week because they don't have enough supply. Because none of these towns want to get involved in cultivation, which I can't obviously blame them because of all the issues. So it's going to be interesting to see how it progresses from the retail standpoint.
Does your mom have cultivation? I'm thinking of some of the towns that have a lot of open space and farmland.
I thought Galilee did.
Speaking generally, the municipalities, because of the wastewater issue, trying to meet the Pinelands Commission's wastewater management requirements makes it more difficult for these facilities to be located within the Pinelands area.
Yeah.
A lot of those areas aren't sewered, and especially for the indoor, it does generate a lot of water. You're using electricity and fertilization, so that wastewater has to be dealt with. So that part is not as easy as it would seem.
Right. Okay, so do we want to move forward with having authorizing Doug to look into doing this, or setting these ordinances up, or how do you want to move forward? I think that's the next step. Yeah, I think that's the next step. And since we'll be moving into budget, so in November, Richard, will budget funds to allow for this?
So I should probably ask both Doug and Scott to give me some budget estimates, because that's one of the key things. We need to spend a lot of money on legal and planning before the thing gets adopted.
Right.
And then once it's there, it may be in the future, somebody might do something that'll generate some income. I have no clue what the dollar amounts are. I don't know what, a 60,000 square foot warehouse would generate in terms of dollars that allow us to charge the 1%. I have no clue about any of that stuff. That's why if we know somebody who has it, we can find out what they get. So
Is the master plan involved in all, as far as amending the master plan to allow for these? I like that smile.
Put my planner hat on again. It's interesting because under the municipal land use law, there's a section that says, after introduction, a land use ordinance shall be referred to the planning board, or joint land use board, and they shall review it and identify any items that are inconsistent with the master plan. So it doesn't actually say it has to be consistent with the master plan. It just, which is how most boards sort of talk about it.
Yeah.
But it actually says identify items that are inconsistent with the master plan. And because cannabis has not been legal in New Jersey, most municipal ordinances are silent in that regard. So when these ordinances have been referred to a number of municipalities, we talk about there are, goals of the master plan that are against economic development opportunities, revenue opportunities that assist the municipality, and then specifically say our ordinance is silent with respect to cannabis, so we don't identify any issues that this is specifically inconsistent with. That obviously is just commentary now. This joint land use board would need to make their own determination as this moves forward, but I don't believe we would need to update the master plan.
Okay. So I guess what we need is a motion to get estimates from Scott and Doug to see what the cost would involve for just to put the plans together.
yeah, they'd walk through, here's what the process is, and here's what we think the cost of the timetable would be, just like any other major project, I guess.
Right.
Do you need a motion just to get a quote?
It's
It's kind of like an authority.
Yeah, it's
So
a
we
sense
sort of
of,
have
it's
the
like we did with the
authority to
parks
move
thing and so on. It says, okay, the majority of you want us to do it. The majority have said, you know something? Let's just leave it alone and we won't waste our time with it. So if the majority of you want us to ask these guys for further timetable and cost information, and then we'll talk about it as part of the budget process, that's a good time to do it.
All right, I'll make a motion to get quotes from Doug and Scott.
Okay.
I'll second.
Do we need a roll call on that, Jen?
I think an all in favor would be
Okay,
sufficient.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Any opposed?
Opposed?
Nope, not at this time.
No.
Thank you.
Okay.
So 5, all in favor.
No.
No.
Three.
Three in favor,
Okay.
2 no.
Oh, I
I
thought
just
that
wanted to
you're not
make-
opposed at this time to just.
No, when we said
quote.
opposed, you went, no, okay.
Oh, so it's 3,
So-
2, okay.
3 yes, 2 no.
Okay.
2
I
nays,
understand.
as technically. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Scott, you already have the info, then you can,
But I'll formally.
Let
send
us
an email
know.
to the rest. Okay.
Yeah, I'll coordinate with Doug because majority of my part is kind of done. It'll more be coordination and having him draft those things.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
good. Very good.
And given that public comment is the next thing up, I'd love to hear what any residents have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say about that once you open it.
Yeah, so, Scott, do you want to stay and see if the public has any?
Happy to.
Okay.
It looks like your agenda is pretty short.
Yeah, it is. So the meeting is now open to the public for comments and questions, session 1. Anybody want to come forward, have any questions for Scott regarding the research that he and the committee, the subcommittee's done? Or any issues in town, actually?
I think it's a great idea.
Go to the microphone.
Do you have to come up?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
you have to come up and
Name and
address.
name and address
Spotlight on
for the record.
Megan Dunpolo, 48 River Lane. I think the cannabis thing is a great idea. I go to the one in Belmar. You can't smell anything. There's so much security. Even if you go near the building, like bells and stuff go off. When you go in securely, you have to go through a security guard and 3 locked doors. So I think the security in the snow won't be too much of an issue for him.
Did you say you work in the one in Belmar?
She goes to the.
You go to the one?
No, I just
Oh.
frequent.
Gotcha.
That's a dispensary?
It's a dispensary, yeah, and they also manufacture.
They cultivate the
Oh,
Yeah.
grower.
the Curaleaf over there off 295?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
right
I know
off
you're
of
talking about,
95.
yeah.
Mhm.
That was the first one in this area.
Yeah.
For medical. It's been there for a long time now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Belmar.
it'd be cool if you guys could go like and tour it or something. I don't know if they allow that or.
Cannabis
Good.
tourists.
Thank you.
Jonathan, J-N-N-O-L-E. It's 48 years old.
Well, maybe I will go down there.
Out the trees.
Right, that's right.
Anyone else have any, John? For anything, yeah, for anything.
I'm John Italiano. I live at 49 Pennington Court. I was here a couple years ago. 49 Pennington Court and 47, right between us is the entrance to the park off of the street. And at that time, we were here to find out who owns that property, which still might be in question. But a couple months ago, the board asked me to take a look at if we could somehow take a look at that area and see if there's any way we could maybe put handicap access from the street into the park. The park has handicap access, so does the crossings. There's access into the park. Newton's Landing doesn't have it. I had reached out to Beverly, and Beverly is going to look at, talk to some people and get back to me about that. Mary Pat Robbie at the Parks Department is also looking at who owns the culvert, because the culvert has a drainage pipe in it that's probably the circumference of the judge's bench there. And it's a problem if you were going to try to put mobility access down there. That's one thing. When I was gone last month, and when I came back, I think the HOA got advice from their attorney that they think that they own that strip. And they plopped a metal sign right in the middle there. Gene and I had always remembered the police and fire, I believe, had to use that as an access.
They blocked it with the poles.
Right.
Right.
I mentioned that to Ray last month, or last week as well.
Right. They are just staying silent on it right now until we find out who actually owns the property. But the sign I think is offensive for a lot of reasons. You know, people come up, it looks like I put a sign on my property right there that says no trespassing, do not enter. I would like to reach out to the parks people to see if that sign could at least go on that wooden, I think it's a removable stanchion that they put there so that vehicles can go through. But I guess my question to you is there a problem with that?
With what?
With the metal sign right in the middle there? Because I think
we don't have access to the other poles as well. Our officers enter through the Field of Dreams area.
All right. So that's not an issue.
No, we can respond.
From the fire department standpoint, our deputy chief is the one who brought it to my attention. He had concerns about that.
I would think so. If fire breaks out back there, you're wasting a lot of time, I think, to get vehicles.
Right. And when he first brought that up to me, he happened to be riding his bike in the area because he frequents the trails to ride his bike, and he saw that, and he was confused because he thought that was public property. And I went back here, I took a look at some of the maps we have, some of the plans, and it looked like it's part of the county's property. And I know that I guess there was some previous discussion about that, but where I guess some people thought it was part of the HOA, some people thought it was part of the county property. I didn't finish my research on that, but I'm pretty sure that's part of the county property. It's a 20-foot wide. It's actually, step up here real quick.
It's on my survey.
Yeah, you can see right here. It's not even an easement. It's actually part of the own. In there, you see the kind of the blue boundary. Right. That's actually part of the park property that goes through there, and it's 20-foot wide. And each of you don't concern either side of that.
Yeah.
What does the sign say?
That was
no trespassing.
No trespassing. That was my understanding, and I've recently reached out because if there's an easement on the property, the easement has to be given to somebody. You just don't have an easement, period. It's naming, a utility, and a county, an access easement to someone. And I really think that there is an easement for access, and I believe the county does own that property.
Well, it's not so much an easement, they actually own it in fee.
In fee simple, so it's not even an easement, but I think the easement may have been granted for access for emergency vehicles at one time. That's what I was looking into, to see if that was
Do you have something to
happening.
say, Scott?
I do. I think it was a blanket cross-access easement. I can forward some maps and some correspondence back to the Township Committee tomorrow, because when that was initially developed, as some of you may remember, there was a tri-party agreement.
Yes, exactly.
And that dealt with Newton's Landing and the county, and there was a land swap with the township that ended up resulting in the Field of Dreams being obtained. And there are not just cross-access easements, but agreements relative to who is required to maintain and mow the basins. So we have, I don't want to speak to it this evening, but we have a lot of correspondence from over the years with Matt Johnson and Doug.
Yeah, and I had reached out to Kitty today because I would think that we would have those documents too. I had reached out to Kitty, I sent her an email.
Yeah. We had actually done a maintenance map.
That's this is a photo on the sheet.
This is the email from Matt Johnson from last November, and it's, been there.
Thanks.
Let's see, the paths this is Matt Johnson, to clarify that same question. The paths you referenced connecting the Newton's Landing Boulevard down to the Rancho Street Waterfront Public Path and the stub running between number 47 and 49 Pennington Court were constructed by Pulte Homes as part of the mediated agreement between Delanco Township and the developer in connection with Newton's Landing development approvals. When this agreement was executed, these paths were to be constructed on land that was intended to be dedicated to Delanco Township as open space. This land was ultimately swapped with Burlington County in exchange for a portion of the county-owned property which became the township's Field of Dreams. The local paths were constructed solely for access of the residents of the development to the proposed public Rancocas Creek Greenway Trail. It was always expected that the HOA would assume responsibility for the operation and maintenance of the local paths after the development was accepted. That's from Matt Johnson.
That's, yeah, but it's not a document, though. It's not the document.
I'm sure they think it's
trying
saying
to-
it's the county's.
Yeah, so, yeah.
With maintenance by the HOA?
Yeah, but he didn't say they owned it. He said, yeah, so I'd be interested in those documents, Scott. And I did ask Kitty to check to see if she had anything, because I was always under the assumption that the county was maintaining that. But,
So I know that there were maintenance obligations because the stormwater, the county owns the basin parcel,
right,
but the township has the obligation to maintain
For
the
the basins.
stormwater structures and the pipes, the outfalls, et cetera. And the township is also responsible for the mowing maintenance of that basin. Now, the county had assumed that and was doing the mowing
right. They
for a
have,
number of years.
right.
But all those things were spelled out in agreements, so I can try to circle back
Okay.
with Steve Lennon from our office, because we had to research some of that when we did the new trail connection.
All right, good. That would be good. That would be helpful.
Glad you stuck around, Scott.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
All right, so I may be back if
Yeah.
the storm drain belongs to you, to Delanco. If anything could be done in a smaller pipe to make an access, that's what we'd be looking at. I'm not sure. I mean, we don't have to get into that now, but.
Right, we'll just have to find out who actually owns it and who's responsible to maintain it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right, John, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Why not, Jack?
Jack Casey, 44 Pennington Court. I live about 4 houses away from the path that we're talking about. It's just become a can of worms that nobody wants to step up and admit that they own it, if they don't own it, who's going to maintain it. Right now, the HOA is cutting the grass there on all those paths. But the issue has really come to a head now that this sign is in the middle of the right of way, or whatever it is. I've got the drawings that were probably 15 years ago. And on there, it points out by points along the property line there, which is lot 63, and it mentions that basically you've got a segment that goes 112 feet to a point, which is then 20 feet to another point, which is back to 112 feet back, which is the finger of ground that is between the two houses. And unless somebody can say that that was eventually divided out, or if there's a deed for just that piece of property, it should belong to whoever owns lot 63.
And Jack, I don't think that's the issue, because I think the county agrees that they own that property and they also own the basin property. But there were agreements, lengthy agreements, that were put in place that separated out some of the maintenance obligations.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know specifically the township was responsible for maintaining the stormwater pipes and the stormwater outfall on the county property. So I think the question now is to confirm in those agreements, is the condition of the trail spelled out for who is obligated to maintain those features?
Well, I think part of the argument right now is the HOA put up 2 signs on county property indicating that it's private property and you can't go through there. Is that right?
Well,
That's bottom line.
we're going to find out.
Okay.
Okay.
Has there been issues with people trespassing? Is that why they put the sign up?
No, they put the sign up for actually, it's a cautionary. I thought it was to protect the HOA.
It is, it's all about liability.
It's all about liability, right.
Concerned about liability, if someone falls and they're thinking that it's, the HOA's property.
Right.
They're going to get sued.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's why they did it, because their attorney told them, that it was the advice of their attorney that they did that. And,
I think Ray said something about insurance last week as well.
right,
Insurance
yeah. So, that's why we need to find out exactly who's to maintain it, who owns it,
Who
and
installed the sign?
the HOA.
HOA. And without doing any research on.
They did research. Their attorney, I went to their meeting the other, their attorney advised them to put the sign up for liability responsibility.
On property that is likely not theirs?
He believes it's theirs. Their attorney said it's theirs.
Yeah, I think their
I'm just
attorney-
telling you what their attorney,
I
what
think their attorney is wrong.
they represented at that
They'll
meeting.
figure it out.
That their attorney said they own it, they're responsible for it, and they don't want to have any liability issues, so they put the sign up.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to
So-
vet out on that.
I indicated to them, working law, as long as I did, that if somebody wants to sue you, the town, the HOA, they can do them all. It doesn't matter, exactly, but,
We'll all do research and we'll circle back on it.
yeah, so we're working on it. Thanks,
You
John.
guys all know.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll close this portion of the meeting to the public, and Scott, you are free to go, and thank you very much for...
If you want to.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Scott.
Scott.
Probably more
Nice
interesting than a
job.
football game or whatever.
Good to see you all. Scott,
Probably, as long as it's not the Eagles.
your research for this, also the connector path between the top end of Landing Boulevard and Copus Trail. If the same thing applies to that too.
Both of the stub connector paths.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Yeah, we'll circle back, because I know between Matt and Michelle and Steve and Mary Pat and everybody, every 4 years, there's a flurry of
I
emails.
just sent you that email.
No, we thought to ask Scott,
Yeah.
ask Harry, or ask Kitty.
planner.
He's the one who knows. Well, but he's in the middle of that.
Yep.
I know.
Research
Good.
is good timing.
Okay,
Come to all our meetings.
yes.
We can't afford that. Pro bono.
Pro bono, because we're just so much fun.
Yeah, Richard just got nervous when somebody said.
I said, we're very entertaining, so you're coming on your own, you're football games.
Have a good night, Scott.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to reports. Richard?
Yeah, I have a couple things to let you know what's things I'm working on. If you remember, we did some work over in the police department. We redid the detention facility, and we also had to replace an air conditioning unit and ceiling. Remember, we had trouble getting it in and out.
Yep.
We had to pay to tear a ceiling down, put it in and out, put that back up again, because we got to do it. Our architect came up with this great idea of putting a more permanent, larger access in the police training room. And we also got permission to close up the door between the new detention facility and the garage, because it wasn't needed anymore based on the way we're doing things. And so we had our architect draw that up, we paid him to do it. But the problem has always been getting a contractor. So we finally got a couple contractors that are interested in doing it. And so hopefully by your next meeting, I'll have a proposal to do it. It'll cost us a few $1,000s more than what we thought, as usual. But I just want to let you know that we now have some proposals to move ahead with that, and it's under the bid limit, but not much. And we'll have a proposal for you so that we can get this thing rolling this year. So that's an update on that. The other thing
That'll save us issues if we need to replace the air conditioner
Correct.
in the future.
Right, because the little closet that has the access, we had to put the access panel back up again so that the closet can be used by the police department.
It's kind of like the issue we have on the other side, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, that one,
Yeah.
those were man doors put in. So yeah, you can go up the ladder to get in there to service the equipment, but you can't bring a big, huge piece of equipment back down through them. So the object is under the drop ceiling. You're gonna cut it out, put a much larger one, put the drop ceiling back, so that the few times in our lifetime that you gotta do it, you can always replace the drop ceiling, disconnect, put it back, and open the thing
It'll
up.
save us money for the future.
So that's the goal. We got 4 more units up there that obviously are gonna need to be replaced in our lifetime. Okay, we've just done the first, so that'll happen. So that's moving on, so you won't be surprised when you see a proposal, a resolution to award a contract to a particular contractor for X number of dollars. It's going to be somewhere in the $15,000 to $18,000 range. Okay. And that's because of both things. Originally, we had costs to do just the sealing thing, but the chief was able to get Department of Corrections permission to seal up that door, which makes a big difference in terms of security in that detention area. So we'll do that at the same time. I mentioned once before, we've got through the excess liability joint insurance fund, we're required to update our personnel policies every couple of years. And so I'm meeting this week with our labor attorney. Hopefully we'll have the updated policy ready for you for your October 16th meeting. It's supposed to take effect November 1st, so that's what the goal is. Last time it was very extensive. This is much less extensive, and we'll deal with some of the other issues that we're dealing with. So don't be surprised when you see that big, thick item coming to you. We mentioned that the property that we own, that little lot behind the 7-Eleven, there's still interest. We didn't get any bids on it last time, so proposal is to rebid the thing. My goal is to get it out this week, have the due date October 11th, for example, and if everything works right, we can, after October 16th meeting, hopefully you can award it, and it's at the same standard, same dollar amount, $5,000 minimum, $1,000 maximum for the legal things, and as is. No trees cutting, no nothing. You know, whoever buys it as is, if they don't want it this time, then we'll have to figure out another alternative. But we're going to try to get it. And the last thing is that there's an audit exit conference this Thursday at 10 o'clock with the auditor. He's only got a couple of minor things. A couple of you have sometimes sat in on them just out of curiosity. So if you're interested in, I'm not sure going to be in here or in the conference room, depending on what Kitty's schedule is that day. Anyhow, so if you're interested in popping in at 10 o'clock Thursday, you can, but it'll be very brief. You'll get the report of what it was, but he can tell you anything you want to know about our finances. Okay? That's what I have.
Okay, thank you. Department heads, Chief.
Good evening, thank you. I'll start with our statistics up until today's date. We issued 26 motor vehicle violations. There were 492 calls for service handled. There were 46 motor vehicle stops conducted and 6 adult arrests.
That's for the month today?
Yeah, so far. Tomorrow, the Hope One mobile unit will be in town. This will be the second time this year that they're coming. They provide critical support for persons and their families struggling with addiction and related issues. So we're going to have Pennsylvania Avenue closed off from 9 to 2 p.m. It'll give them the ability to operate there. And last time they were here, it went off without a hitch and we got positive feedback. That's conducted by the Bronx County Sheriff's Department and some other agencies. Our recruits in the academy, they're still on track to graduate on the 28th of this month. So we're happy about that, and you know, we're looking forward to them to join us. With the spike in increase in car thefts, it's happening everywhere throughout the country, specifically with Hyundais and certain Kia vehicle models. We just obtained some steering wheel locks that we're offering to our residents, so they can come to the municipal building and go to our administrative assistant's window right here at the front, and all you got to do is provide ID to show you live in town and have one of those vehicles, and they will provide a free lock for you. And that's all I have for this session, since we just were here last week.
Good. Would you be able to have those locks available at Community Day for some residents who?
As long as the supply lasts.
The supply lasts, yeah, that may be something, because that's October 14th.
Yep, absolutely. And one other thing, I want to apologize to, I know at least there's 2 residents of Newton. We had a conflict of interest come up last week. We were supposed to be at the meeting, and I apologize, we weren't able to have anybody there. And I did email Ray Weber and told him that if he would like us to come out, let's have another date, and we'll make sure I'll personally be there.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
Janice.
The early registration for the November League of Municipalities Conference is looming, so I did hear from one committee person, for pre-registration. So if you do want to pre-register for the league conference, please let me know as soon as possible. And then I'm going to turn it over to Bev to report on some things that she handled for me while I was on vacation. Thank you.
Last Thursday, I attended the Community Development Block Grant meeting. Very short meeting, but the important thing that came out of it was that the executed sub-grantee agreements have been returned to municipalities, and
we received it today.
They are working on the 2024 process. Timeline, in particular, the process will be the same for applying for grants. And that's about it from CDBG. They mentioning our upcoming events, September 30th, the townwide yard sale, and registration will soon draw to a close for the map. We ask that residents call by 9/22 to use this Friday. On October 7th, we'll have our community cleanup day and our shredding event. And on October 14th, will be community day at the firehouse. Lots of stuff going on this fall.
Yes, great. Thank you. Township Committee, Carolyn.
Yes, thank you. I attended the August DISA meeting. Soccer is underway and basketball registration is now open. The fields are back to being green.
Yes,
With the rain, so yay for that. I know the sprinklers are being addressed and that's ongoing. I attended a code enforcement subcommittee meeting with Mr. Barlett and Mr. Ruggiano, as well as Richard, to go over various violations and enforcement issues throughout town. We do that every couple months. The Joint Land Use Board meeting, I was unable to attend and there were no applications.
That's it. Okay. Mike?
A couple small items. Let's see, Shade Tree meeting, as I mentioned, previously briefed the committee on that the Shade Tree Commission was disappointed that the Township Committee that was in attendance at the July 17th meeting had overruled the Shade Tree Commission's decision on a particular tree. Let's see, Environmental Board got a bench from the Trex plastic collection and met with Matt Johnson and Steve Lennon out on one of the connector paths on the Rancocas Trail. So we selected the site and I've been in discussions with some leaders of the Boy Scout troop and possibly some assistance on building putting in a concrete pad for that bench location. And continuing to follow up with some correspondence that I continue to hear from Senator Singleton's office and Representative Congressman Andy Kim's office regarding some earlier emails on the Zerberg issues that we were having with Corps of Engineers. So that's all I got. Thank you.
September the 6th, I attended the History Board meeting. The walking tour signs are in. They're currently in storage over at the Public Works building. They look good. It's just a matter of getting, I guess, the hardscape done on the triangle out front of the Presbyterian Church, where the signs will be, and there'll be a bench there and some walking tour booklets that'll be available to the public to be able to use to take the walking tour. Babe Ruth Day for 2024, working on something a little bit different for next year. We're looking to do, I believe it's July 1st, it's a Saturday, but to just read a proclamation and acknowledge Babe Ruth having played in Delanco right near that time or on that day. But then in the fall, to actually do Babe Ruth Day, where they have the different teams playing and they want to get together with, I guess, recreation and see about getting some of the kids to play baseball, to have an exhibition game. So that's in the works and discussion. Then they're going to be at the townwide yard sale on September the 30th. They have a table they normally set up out front of, I guess it's Pearson School out there in Burlington Ave. September the 12th was a senior meeting. We had a full house. We had 30 people in attendance, and Peter Fritz gave a presentation on the history board for Delanco and tried to recruit, or at least put out there that looking for new members that are willing to help out and be part of the history board. Let's see. The library meeting on October the 18th, there's a Voskov Day for Friends of the Library. So they'll have, I guess, like gift cards that you can buy and get a discount over at Voskov's. Let's see. The Sewage Authority meeting was quick, and the mayor may elaborate on that, but they were short one member. Well, actually, 2 members were missing. The chairperson, Tom Pine, wasn't able to make it that night, and then Mr. Dobie wasn't there, and I believe he's moved out of town. Is that correct,
Yes,
Mayor?
he resigned. We got a resignation letter from him.
Okay. And then on September the 13th, I attended the Burlington County Commissioners meeting, and there's nothing to report from there. That's all I have, Mayor.
Oh, okay, thank you. Matt?
I attended the Fire Commission meeting on August 22nd. Normal business occurred. Same for the Fire Company meeting the following week on the 28th. The Fire Company will be doing its hoagie sale during the town-wide yard sale next weekend, Saturday the 30th, $7 per hoagie. Come on down, and as always, we'll have American turkey and Italian hoagies. First come, first served. Get them while they're cold.
Make sure you make a lot regardless of the weather.
Absolutely.
Remember last year?
Oh, yeah, they sold out.
We sold out in the spring.
Yeah.
Really quickly.
The last one, yeah.
I attended the Municipal OEM Coordinators meeting on August 29th, and this was the kickoff meeting for preparing the update for the Burlington County Hazard Mitigation Plan. We had some homework as a result of the meeting, which I've been working on with Bev to get some forms completed, as well as the municipal staff, so thank you very much, Bev, for the help on that. And we also went through our list of important facilities in the town that they had on file. It was very short, and as Mike mentioned a couple of meetings ago during the OEM meeting here, they put important facilities on there, such as the gazebos at Pennington Park that kind of left off our sewage pump stations, and they still had our old town hall at 515 Burlington Avenue as our town hall. So we updated that. We're going to make sure they actually keep it updated this time. I attended a special meeting of the Board of Ed on August 30th. 2 new board members were sworn in, one who is present here tonight. Thank you, Joanne, and Mike McNeil. I know it's Mike, there's too many Mikes I know, but they were both also sworn in. I attended the Board of Ed work session meeting last Wednesday. That was on September 13th. It was announced they are sending the contract for a new interim superintendent who's taking over for Joe Mersinger, whose last day is the end of the month. They're sending his contract to the County Board of Ed for approval, and assuming that it's approved, he'll be officially approved at the Board of Ed meeting this Wednesday night. And the interim superintendent is Dr. Leonard Fitz. He actually retired a long time ago, back in '96, which happened to be when I graduated high school.
Oh, wow.
So he has a very, very long career and a very impressive resume. He's been the interim superintendent at various districts in the area, including Morristown and Burlington City. And assuming he's approved this Wednesday, he'll be starting October 1st. And the contract is for 2 years, and it's a 5-day-a-week job. So no slowing down for him.
I'm excited.
So am I.
Yeah.
Very good background. And
He does.
as Carolyn mentioned, August 30th, I attended the code enforcement meeting along with her and Ed Rucciano and Richard. We went through everything code enforcement related in Delanco. And finally, one thing not specific to this town, but I encourage everyone who's out there driving, please be on the lookout for kids riding bicycles. We at the fire department have been dispatched for all too many calls for cars versus pedestrians on bikes over the last couple of weeks. And with kids riding bikes to school now and adults riding bikes for leisure, we don't want to see any accidents in Delanco. The couple of calls we had, they weren't in Delanco, but they were in our neighboring communities. But pedestrians, car drivers, not paying attention isn't just limited to those towns. As I'm sure Adam and his staff has seen. So just keep that in mind while you're out there and keep everyone safe.
Pardon?
Do you report on the recreation meeting?
Yeah, because I wasn't unable to attend, yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah.
I did attend the recreation meeting last week in Kate's absence. The movie and trunk or treat night, the registration's open for October 28th. It's $5 a vehicle for 25 vehicles limited to Delanco residents. And we do include that $5 fee just so we can make sure people kind of show up with more if they have something invested in it. The trunk or treat is free to Delanco residents as well. I just wanted to point that out. It will be held at the Field of Dreams complex, the event hall. We also are going to be doing the tree lighting in Gateway Park on December 2nd. That will also be in conjunction with what we're calling the Holiday Christmas Village. We're going to open it up to Delanco businesses and vendors, as well as residents are going to be able to pick up their gingerbread houses that night, pictures with Santa. So there's a whole slew of things going to be happening, and that'll be the first time we're going to have it in Gateway Park. So everyone's excited about that and diligently planning. I think that's it.
Okay, good. I know some of you may be aware that I had hip replacement surgery on August 9th, so I've been unable to attend some of the meetings that I so enjoy attending. So I appreciate Carolyn filling in for me at rec. But anyway, I'm working my way back to picking up those commitments, and so I have some information for you tonight that I did attend the Sewer Authority meeting, and I have some updates. As far as Dolan's concerned, their bonds have been released and they're just now on a maintenance bond. Stylex, there's nothing new to report. 989 Coopertown Road is nothing new to report. We did approve a resolution authorizing contracts for the trunk line projects. They're just subject to DEP's approval. Approval was granted for a new heating unit at the garage to keep that new jetback in good condition. And the operator, Doug Weller, reported that the 2 new employees are working out great, and his report is on file. History Board, I've missed several meetings of the History Board. I'm not comfortable walking on stones to get into the mansion, but Peter has been kind enough to keep me advised as to what's going on. So they're still working on heritage sites, and the triangle project, as Fern had indicated, is in the process of being installed. So they're doing a great job, and they are in need of some members if anyone's interested. The Hen Advisory Board will be having their first meeting on October the 1st at the home of Suzanne Perez. The commitment of the board and what their responsibilities are will be outlined and discussed. The seniors, I was unable to make their meeting, but their next meeting is October the 10th at Dobbins, and I arranged for the Office of Aging to attend and provide them with the different services that are available for seniors. I attended a meeting at Newton's Landing, the Homeowners Association, and addressed many of their questions and concerns. And I am meeting with the county engineer tomorrow to discuss the lighting and entrance issues that are concerned at Cooper and Creek Road, as well as Newton's Landing. So with that end, I will, and I do want to mention that the Women's Club is having the 5K run this year, October 28th. So mark your calendars. It's a run, a walk. You can even walk your dog, but come out and support the group or support the runners. So that's it. Now we'll move on to the consent agenda items. The consent agenda items are considered to be routine and will be enacted with a single motion. Any item requiring discussion will be removed from the consent agenda. All consent agenda items will be reflected in full in the minutes. Ordinance 2023-16. An ordinance to amend an ordinance entitled, An Ordinance of the Township of Delanco Providing for and Determining the Rate of Compensation of Officers and Employees to amend the current year rates for the CWA covered members of the Delanco Public Works Department. First reading by title only, and set the public hearing date for October 2nd, 2023 at 7 p.m. Resolution 2023-105, specifying the salaries of certain employees within Delanco Township. Payment of bills. Current fund, $102,588.26. Payroll, $54,714.64. Municipal open space, $4,971.75. And the escrow trust, $3,097.50. Approval of department reports, and now I need approval of the consent agenda items. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Carolyn and Fern. Roll call, please, Janice.
Mr. Bartlett?
Yes.
Mr. Olet?
Yes.
Ms. Seuss?
Yes.
Mr. Templeton? Mrs. Patrick?
Yes. Correspondence, Janice.
Yes, one piece of correspondence you had mentioned earlier. I received an email correspondence today from Robert Dovey indicating that he, effective September 1st, due to moving out of Delanco Township, he will no longer be eligible to be a member of the Sewage Authority. So that his moving out of town creates an immediate vacancy.
Right. And did you get the email? Because there was an email sent regarding the vacancy.
From one, yes, we have one, received one person is interested in filling that position.
Right.
That has been received.
Yeah, and I think Tom was going to get in touch with you as well.
I did speak with Mr. Fine, and he wanted to know the procedure for filling the vacancy and how it was advertised, and I said, we basically just do the block ad on the billboards and the Beverly B for all, volunteers for all our boards and commissions. So there's not really a set advertisement for any particular vacancy or position on one of the volunteer boards or commissions.
Right.
So it is, in the case of a sewage authority vacancy, it is the township committee's, position to fill.
Right.
So.
And there was one person who sent his in, was Phil Jenkins?
Phil Jenkins, there was one, but I wanted to, before entering that as correspondence, wanted to see how the committee wanted to proceed with, we do have the block ads where for the annual reorganization, I believe it's December 1st, people should have their requests in. We're getting ready to send a memo out tomorrow to the board secretaries. For those people, you'll get a copy of that. Also, who have terms expiring, but this is different.
Right,
I believe Mr. Dovey's position went to 1/31/27. So this isn't a normal.
No, it's to fill his unexpired term.
To fill his unexpired term. So, and you can fill that at any time. You don't have to wait till reorg. You can fill it tonight. You can fill it whenever you want.
Yeah, I think Phil had expressed an interest to come back on. He's probably more knowledgeable on our sewer system and the authority than anyone who actually is on the sewer authority right now, other than maybe Doug Weller and Ben. So I would like to appoint Phil Jenkins back on the sewer authority to finish out Mr. Dovey's term.
You want
Is there a
to
second?
give an opportunity for other inquiries? for
I
letters
just
of
made a
interest?
motion and Carolyn seconded, so do we have a vote?
So there's a motion by Mrs. Patrick, second by Ms. Seuss, to appoint Phil Jenkins to fill the unexpired term of Robert Dovey to 1/31/27. There is an active motion on the floor.
Yes. So roll call, please, Janice.
Okay, one moment, please. Mr. Bartlett?
Considering Phil was on the board previously for centuries, it feels like, I would say yes.
Okay. Mr. Olet?
based off of just finding out that Mr. Dovey had resigned, and I know Mr. Jenkins has been on the board for many years and is probably qualified, but I think that the opportunity for other residents within the community, at least between now and our next meeting, should have had the opportunity to be able at least to throw their name into the ring. I know how things work politically, and so it's already been decided, but at this point I'm going to have to say no, again, just based off of not giving the opportunity to other residents in the community.
Mr. Arlett, that is a no?
That is a no, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Seuss?
Yes.
Mr. Templeton?
And for the same reason that Mr. Arlett enumerated, that unfortunately it wasn't fast enough to bring up the question that this would be available to the wider community rather than, as we found out 8 minutes ago, that there was a vacancy. So, no.
And Mrs. Patrick?
Yes, and my vote yes is because when Phil's term was up, he wasn't reappointed, and if Fern is going to refer to political, I think that was a political move, because Phil Jenkins was on the sewer authority for a number of years and knows that system better than anyone on the board, as I had indicated, and the reasons why he wasn't reappointed were personal, not for what his knowledge is. So he's very well qualified, and he should have the opportunity to serve again. So my vote is yes. Thank you.
Your motion carries.
Thank you. So now the meeting is open to the public. Session 2, any questions, concerns? Come forward, please.
Megan Jones-Polo, 48 River Lane. I had a question about the soccer field lighting. Is there any update on that?
We have asked the engineer to give us a quote to see how much it would be to light one field. So we're waiting for Harry Fox to get that back to us. Carolyn asked him at the last meeting. We had thought he was already working on it, but kind of slipped his mind. So we're working on that.
Okay, perfect. I think it's a great idea for the kids.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay, I'll close this portion of the meeting to the public. Is there anything else to discuss tonight? Okay. There's no need for executive session, so is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Nat and Fern, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you for attending.